Glorious. Hello, everybody. I'm Lamar Legend, Seattle Shakespeare Company's diversity programming coordinator. I am happy to just bring this wonderful, what will be a wonderful conversation between myself and an incredible artist I absolutely love. Welcome to Reckoning with Shakespeare with Lamar Legend and Meme García. Oh my gosh, I have a bunch of really exciting questions. I'm so excited. I'm so glad we get to do this. I love you. I love you. I love your work. House of Suenos is so freaking good, y'all. It's so freaking good. But before we get into any of that, hey Meme, hi.
Hi.
Will you
Hi.
will you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, for those who don't know
Yeah.
you?
Okay, cool. My name is Meme Garcia. I go by they, them pronouns. Currently I'm in Southern Oregon on the land of the Shasta and Sakama, but I grew up in Seattle, Washington on the land of the Duwamish. And originally I'm from El Salvador, which is the land of the Lencan people, of the Nahua people. And I am a poet, a playwright, an actor. I kind of do it all. Recently, I've been making my living off of being a poet, which is weird. But and I'm super excited to be here with you, Lamar. I think the first show I saw you in, Lamar, was Howl's Moving Castle, where you played Calcifer.
It is wild that is the first show you saw me, and I think that is great. Thank you so much. So yeah, thank you for that. Tell us how did you first encounter Shakespeare, and why have you stuck with him all these years?
I know, it's been a long time. I first encountered Shakespeare. My papi read me. He had a Latin American translation of Hamlet, and he would read it to me when I was quite young. And when I was still in El Salvador, or when I would go back home and visit, we would kind of read these plays. He's very into the classics. And then when I was 12, I was in a like a teen production of Hamlet. It was like a camp production. My mom put me in it, and I played Bernardo. And then the girl who was playing Hamlet dropped out, and I was the only person with a part small enough that they could replace my part. So then I became Hamlet, and
That's crazy.
And I remember the girl who was playing Ophelia, she must have been like 16. And I was like, this is the most beautiful woman I've ever seen in my life. Like, I was really 12. And I just had a blast. And I had never felt so powerful. And especially with that role, you got sword fighting, you're asking these huge questions, you're dying, you're stabbing people. And my uncle was Polonius, and my aunt was Gertrude. My uncle and my aunt are very close in age to me, but it was like a whole family affair.
That's incredible. So wow, there's so many layers there. So first of all, that show is a haunting tale, and you literally had your uncle. Hamlet's uncle was in the play. Like, you were like, that's crazy. And your aunt played Gertrude.
Yes. It gets better though, because then that year, I remember it was in 7th grade, and to get into the thespian club, you had to be in character like a whole day in school. And I decided that I was going to go as Hamlet. I was going to be in character as Hamlet. And my mom was out of the country. She was working, I don't know, probably in Guatemala or El Salvador. And I got called into the principal's office because I had brought like a wooden dagger to school. And I was like in the hallways dramatically dying. Or like I'd be like, doth milady thinketh I am, like, and I wouldn't stop talking in Shakespeare. And the principal was like, my mom called me. She was like, what are you doing? And I got in a lot of trouble. I did get in a lot of trouble for that.
You had to be Hamlet the whole day
to get into thespian club.
Wow. Wow, we
Yeah.
actors take ourselves way too seriously.
And it really went from 0 to 100. It was, I had never heard of theater, I had never heard of Shakespeare, and then
Wow.
within like a summer, I was 100% fully committed to it. Like committed enough to stay in the character of Hamlet for a whole day in seventh grade.
That's incredible. And so your first what first drew you to Shakespeare, your first encounter with Shakespeare was Hamlet, which
Mhm.
House of Suenos is based on. So that play started haunting you since you were 12.
Yeah, and it's the play I think I've done more than any of his other works. I think I've done it 4 times.
All
Four
right, well,
times.
let's get into it. Why Hamlet? Other than
I
like it was the first thing, but what else?
I think when I was younger, I didn't have quite a clear idea. Just I loved the feeling of being powerful.
Hmm.
Um, and then as I started to get into high school and college, I really started to use his play to understand my own depression. And I come from there's a history of suicide in my family, and suicide ideation. And so it was helpful for me to kind of try to work through the empathy that I needed to feel for people who are struggling with those things. Because when I was
Mhm.
younger, I couldn't understand why someone would want to do those things. And now that I'm now that I'm currently going through a pretty large depressive episode, right? I look back at Hamlet and I kind of see these big questions around to be or not to be, to live or not to live, to act or not to act. So I think it started to haunt me more in that way of being aware of depression and anxiety and suicide ideation and PTSD in high school and into college. And then that's
Mhm.
kind of the thing that has really stuck with me since then.
Mhm. Wow. Um, can you tell us about the genesis? I mean, I think that's the perfect segue into how House of Sueños was born. So tell us, how was it born?
Mm-hmm. House of Sueños started in 2015 as my honors project at Seattle University. Carol Roscoe directed it at the time, lovely
Hmm.
Carol, and
Yep.
it had like 12 different Shakespeare plays in it. And it was originally I was trying to kind of work through my relationship with my sister, and then work through my relationship with a pretty toxic ex, and just kind of putting my life, looking at my life through the lens of all these different characters. There was Rosalind, Celia, Juliet, Romeo. I think there was even a little Antony and Cleopatra in there, if I remember. There's a bunch of different shows. And then in 2017, when I got back from grad school, I messaged the script. I emailed Wiley Bashel Gorn, who ended
Hmm.
up being who's my to this day my main collaborator and director on the project. And I knew that my friend Megan Dolby had a solo show that was loosely inspired by Macbeth. And I said, well, what if we did them together, like an evening of solo shows? And Wiley said, well, that's good, but I think we need to make this play more specifically about Hamlet. Because Hamlet was always like the main part of the show. But then in 2017, we decided to just make it the only one. And that was the rest of that was history. And now it's
Wow.
nothing but Hamlet.
So what took it from being a solo show to you focusing, other than collaborating with Wiley, focusing solely on developing you as a playwright, developing it into a fully realized show?
In 2019, I was at OSF working on Comedia of Errors, which is a bilingual adaptation of Comedy of Errors. And I met a actor, performer, Caro Zeller, who plays Rena in the show. And she really started to kind of open my mind up. I feel like when you're a playwright, you meet people who like truly are like muses to you, like inspirations. And I would say that
Mhm.
Caro is definitely one of my muses. And she just was asking all these questions about, well, if you're going to do bilingual Shakespeare, what kind of Spanish is it? And as an actor, I think specifically, right, she was like, I want to perform stuff that feels from me, by me, for me, and she's worked on a number of new plays. And I just kind of started to put some of our conversations and thoughts, and the more that I started to write the play, the more I just started to put her voice into the character of Rena. And then it was too much for one person. I sat down and I was like, I can't do all. There's no way that one person could do all of this. I mean, probably only Sarah Portolab could do all of this. Um, and we reached out to Gato, and then she did it, and it was a 2-person play. And then at that talk back, Armando Duran was there, who ended up playing Papi, and Catherine Castellanos was there, and I was just looking at them. I remember looking at them and being like, there's a place for you in this play, but I don't know where. I don't know where yet, but there's a place for you. And when the pandemic hit, I just kind of Wiley and I started to go back to it and back to it, and it just kept on growing. And then finally I was like, I do not want to be in this play anymore. So I got myself out of it.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
So the play, and correct me if I'm wrong, what's one of the beautiful, rich things about the play is how it centers the story around this family, but in terms of language and the culture of it, it's centered and reflects your El Salvadorian roots and your Colombian roots, and also, you know, your this American life, you know, as well, your American upbringing. And so can you tell us about that intersectionality a little bit, and why that piece, those roots, are so important to you as an artist?
Yeah, I will say I'm not Colombian, even though I wish I was, because wow, they rock. I was
Thank
just
you.
in Colombia. Like, it was the last trip I took before the pandemic happened. So I love that place. But I am half Salvadoran. I being from Central America is a truly unique experience. I think particularly when we talk about xenophobia in the United States, if you look at kind of the remarks of this, you know, of our racist president, our previous president, a lot of his remarks kind of were really geared towards Salvadoran, Guatemaltecos, Nicaraguenses, and Hondureños, about their slow migration into the United States. And he called them, if you remember correctly, shithole countries. And I just remember, like, I grew up thinking that being Salvadoran was like the greatest gift. My mom was like, you are so unique, you're so beautiful, you have this culture, you have this heritage, you have this history that a lot that people don't have, you know. And my dad fought in the Civil War, and my mom was a revolutionary, and they have these epic stories. And so I always saw being Central American as like a huge badge of honor. And as I kind of grew up, I started to lose that sense of pride, really, because there was nobody around other than my uncle, who's adopted from El Salvador. It was just the two of us in primarily white neighborhoods. And so when I started to write House of Sueños, I just infused it with my own life. And I just started to realize, I was like, being Salvadoran and Central America, and being from Central America, is incredibly important to this story. And I also just selfishly was like, there should be more Central American playwrights, like, produced, you know. I mean, one of the most famous Central Americans right now is Oscar Isaacs, right? He's from Guatemala. And so I was like, I just want a little bit more representation, and I want, you know, more people to understand what the intergenerational trauma looks like, specifically of colonialism and U.S. involvement in Central American politics, foreign policy, the Monroe Doctrine. All of these things, like, influence very heavily the trauma that I have inherited from my family in El Salvador to this day. So yeah, I think that's kind of the connection there.
Yeah, absolutely. So this show, deservedly so, has received so many accolades, critical acclaim, Seattle Times, The Folger, Teen Tix, and most recently, like 2 days ago, you were just on KUOW. I mean, it's just fantastic, and it's deserved. What do you think about House of Sueños is drawing people to it, that people are connecting with it? Why do you think people are?
It's one of those stories where there's a universal in the specific. I think that people, regardless of what their background is, race, ethnicity, age, gender, they resonate quite heavily with the themes of the show, which is like trauma. I think, how do we deal with trauma and grief? And I think specifically right now, the grief and trauma that the United States is experiencing with deaths from COVID is so immense. And I think that people are kind of turning to House of Sueños because it shows what the pitfalls, the downsides of isolation, and how important it is for people to show up for each other and to stand in solidarity with each other and to reach out. That's what I think. I think there's also something kind of cool about people experiencing podcast drama. Before I wrote this version of House of Sueños, I had not really experienced a lot of podcast plays before. I did when I started to do research, and there's some really awesome ones out there. Blackmore Manor, The Horrors of Dolores Roach, Two Princes is another one I just started listening to that our sound designer Megan Roach sent me. And it's so much fun to just listen. And they're like 20 minutes, 25 minutes, and you just sit and listen while you do other things. It's so I think there's a combination of the way that Sueños deals with grief, and then specifically this medium. And I've never had so many people experience it. It's like thousands of people have downloaded it and listened to it. It's very great. Bananas.
Yeah. I just loved listening to it. Like right before bed, I would just like tuck myself in like a good bedtime story, and then I put in my earphones, because it is important for everyone who hasn't listened to it yet to listen to it with headphones, because it's so well edited, sound wise. And it would just create this lovely and like rich, full sensory experience. It was just fantastic. I know that's why I continue to come back for more, episode to episode. So you're a writer. What's your favorite part of the writing process, of your process, in fact?
Well, I will say my writing process is still in development. I feel like somewhere Wiley's just laughing at this question. My writing process is still in development. I work much better when there's a deadline approaching. My favorite part of the writing process, I think it's that moment, like right after I've written a scene, and Wiley's my roommate, so he lives literally just straight across the hall, is when I've written a scene and I'll take it into his room and I'm like, okay, here we go, we got to read it out loud. And we'll just we'll just share it all, and we read it out loud, and then we have a conversation about it. And then I go back and I rewrite it. I think that it's always the most terrifying because it's the first draft of something, but I feel it's the most possibility. It has the most potential, I think. Once you've just written something, you get it out on the page.
Yeah, I agree. I think it took me a long time to realize that like writing just to write is such a great form of expression, and there's no bars on the windows. You can just go to your heart's content. So yeah, I relate to that. That makes sense. Can you tell us about Seattle Shakespeare specifically? Like, how did you first hear about it? How did you first started working with them? Yeah, what was that experience like? When did that happen for you?
I think so. I heard of Seattle Shakes because I grew up in Seattle. I grew up on Vashon Island, so we had like lots of field trips, and I believe I saw a production of The Tempest when I was in like middle school. I could be totally wrong. I don't even know if I have a memory of sitting in the center house and there being like driftwood on the stage, which I feel like is usually how The Tempest is done. Driftwood. The concept is driftwood. And I remember loving it. And then I worked with Amy Thone in a summer program called the Young Actors Institute, which was run through Seattle Children's Theater. And I remember kind of doing that. That's where I met Sheila Daniels and Mariah C. Kaminsky. And then I went to undergrad, and I kind of always knew that they were there. But the first Shakespeare company that I probably truly like worked with was Upstart Crow Collective. And there are many kind of intersections between Upstart Crow and Seattle Shakespeare Company. And then I was in 2014, I got cast as an intern in the production of Measure for Measure that Desdemona Chang did. And I was playing the lucrative virgin whore dichotomy. I was a nun and a prostitute in that show. Sometimes I would have my prostitute costume underneath my nun costume. my sex worker costume underneath my nun costume, which I just think is hilarious. And then ever since then, I kept on coming back. in different shows. I did Hamlet with them, and then I did Lear and Richard the Third, my final show with them. Other than right now, I'm doing Romeo and Juliet, and obviously House of Sueños with them. If I'm forgetting a show, do forgive me, whoever I forgot.
No. Tell us about Romeo and Romeo y Julieta.
Romeo y Julieta, what a fire script. Ana Maria has worked with Seattle Shakes for a number of years, adapting bilingual Shakespeare plays. I think she's done, and I'm gonna butcher this, she's done a Scottish play, she's done Hamlet, Taming of the Shrew. I don't know if there's another one. Do forgive me, Ana Maria. But and so she has created kind of a really long-term relationship with Seattle Shakes, with like kind of insisting that they do bilingual Shakespeare, which is awesome. And now it's their first main stage, like I think their whole season is bilingual Shakespeare, which is so cool. And it's directed by my good friend Sophie Franco, who also plays the Attic. And it's got a killer cast. I don't know if it's been announced yet, but the cast is just fire. And it's so strange doing theater via Zoom, but I think the concept works really, really well, and the script is really beautiful, and it's very queer, very very hot. I would say very hot. I think that's the right word. And it's just a blast. Ana Maria's poetry is really beautiful, and you'll find the more that people do bilingual Shakespeare, the harder it is, because a number of the published editions of like Spanish texts are in Spain Spanish. And so what Ana Maria does is like she breeds, I bet something like 5 different versions of a translated script, and then she writes her own beautiful poetry. And she really infuses the poetry, the words with then her actor's identity. So we talked a lot about me being Salvadoran and what Salvadoran Spanish looks like, and she's truly a master of her craft. It's really beautiful to do one of her plays.
Totally. Yeah. For those who don't know, Meme is referring to Ana Maria Campoy, who is Seattle Shakespeare's latest associate artist, resident associate artist, so that she can just translate all of these wonderful, wonderful works in Shakespeare's canon, Romeo and Juliet being one of them. Thanks for that plug, by the way, because oof, she deserves it. She's fantastic.
She totally does.
Yeah, she's incredible. This is the season, for those who don't know, this is the season to invest in Seattle Shakes, because it's just truly diverse, wonderful, rich storytelling, and employing fantastic BIPOC artists like Meme. So one thing I heard you say a while back was, we don't need Shakespeare, Shakespeare needs us. Will you elaborate, please?
Yes. So I am the first to admit, I'm not the first to admit, many people have admitted it before me, and I will not be the last, that Shakespeare is a dead white dude, you know? And I remind myself that I'm like, if we were to just stop doing his works, he would literally just cease to exist. He would just float into oblivion, like so many of his contemporaries have, you know? And he really, truly needs us to continue telling his stories. And I think so often artists, actors, playwrights, whatever, you know, theater artists in general, we never give ourselves enough credit because we're always like searching for an institution to hire us to give us work. And I'm like, no, those institutions, those people, they need us to help them tell their stories. And I think the same applies to Shakespeare. And I think when you start to like take the power back into your own hands with Shakespeare, you stop seeing him as a god and you just start seeing him as a dude, you know, that like you could start seeing his plays as really beautiful things, rife with problems, and start to rip them apart, shred them, right? Take what you want, eat the chicken, spit out the bones. Like, you don't need all of that. I mean, Hamlet Uncut is like 6 hours long. We don't need all of it, you know? And I think that people, there's this certain sense of perfectionism that comes with the training required. Like, I remember for many years, I never even performed Shakespeare because I was like, oh, I'm not good enough. I don't have the right training. I don't have the right technique. I don't have the right additions. There's so many things that keep marginalized folks out of the room, right? Because we don't have the money, the time, the patience to invest in it. And I think that once we stop putting him so high up on a pedestal, we can just explore his works in a way that I think some people have been doing, and now will be more commonplace.
Well said. Completely agree. What's next for House of Suenos? If you can tell us anything.
Oh my God. There's nothing. I mean, I want there to be so much, and I think there will. I have to remind myself that theaters, like everyone right now, is just like ruminating, we're stewing. My dream, I have a couple dreams for House of Sueños. One, that there's a stage production of it, because I do want to see one stage version of this play before I die. No, I'm just kidding. And two, I think it would work very well as like a HBO special or something. I think that there's always a certain cinematic quality to my writing, which I feel like I've been always resisting, but now as I grow older and I'm like, where is the money at? I start to kind of, I'm like, oh yeah, this could totally be a movie of some sort. But I do think there's a, yeah, I don't know. Those are my dreams for it. You know, that's all I can hope for it. I think that enough people have listened to it now that they start to ask us to do more adaptations. That's the thing, is I'm hoping that this opens the door for more adaptations of stuff.
I'm so glad you mentioned HBO, because I've been wanting to tell you that, like, I see this as a limited series for television for sure. And you know, Hollywood's looking for that right now. I mean, like, they really are pulling podcasts and developing them into series. And so, like, if you know anyone who's, you know, in that world or what have you, or connected, and even in a tertiary way, peripheral way, yeah, I think this would be just perfect for it. It's just ripe with all of the fixins, in my opinion. So that sounds fantastic. And of course it should be on stage. Of course it should be on stage. Are you working on anything else right now other than Romeo and Juliet?
Yes, I am. I'm working on In the Margins Theater Company, which is a company run out of Sunnyside, California, trans indigenous company. Should be on the lookout for them. World, they're really great. They commissioned me to finish my play Juana y Carmen, which I wrote a couple of years ago. And now I have to actually keep writing it. I don't get to just be like, oh, it's there. I have to actually finish the play. And so yeah, I'm working on that. I was working a little bit on a pilot for a TV show I wanted to write called Las Iguanabas. Las Iguanabas is a Salvadoran Central American folklore about a woman with the head of a horse who waits by the river or on the crossroads at night for men who have been adulterous. Which I just think is a fascinating story. And then I do, in the future, Wiley and I have been talking about doing an adaptation of the Scottish play that is like half Macbeth and half Salem Witch Trials. Because I just think that I've always been fascinated with the Salem Witch Trials. So yeah,
Same.
those are kind of the right?
Right.
Okay, I was thinking about it because I like grew up close to Salem. I grew up in Boston. So I would go to Salem, like as a child, like going to the Wax Museum. I would like wander around. I would go to the graveyards as like five-year-old maybe. And I think my mom was like, what is wrong with this child? Just like so stressed. But I think my obsession, I mean, I have an obsession with witchcraft and magic and brujeria and all those things. But I think my obsession with the Salem Witch Trials is that at the heart of it, it's like one of the singular moments in American history where A, women are at the center of history, and B, specifically a BIPOC woman is at the center of it. And Tituba has been, because of The Crucible, which is one of my least favorite plays of all time, like ripped her story away from her. And I'm like, no, the story should be about Tituba. And John, who was also in the same house with Tituba, who was another, and they both came from, it's thought that they both came from the West Indies and, the Gulf of Mexico area. And I'm just like, that's an amazing story. It's an amazing story right there. So anyways, I just have always
I think that's incredible. I also think it's incredible that you absolutely you hate The Crucible, because it is my favorite contemporary play. I think that's great. No, I think because of this, because I love hearing opinions that are like literally like diametrically opposed to my
Yeah.
own, because I'm just so curious about what they have to say about it, because it only enriches my experience of the thing that we're discussing. To that end, we should totally collaborate on writing the true story of John Proctor and Tituba.
Yes, I know.
Look
I'm
out for
like,
that, folks.
yeah, look out. I mean, it's interesting when we talk about classics. I think my problem with The Crucible is I've only ever seen productions helmed by white men, and John Proctor has always been a white man. And I'm just like, gosh, here's an example. And I remember Sarah Portkalov saying this, where she was just like, who starts the wars? Men. Who are the people that are most affected by it? Like women and children. And I just think that that's the frustrating, and it's also not historically accurate. I get what they're doing. It's about McCarthyism and yada yada. But
Totally.
yes, I do definitely think we should collaborate.
Yes. Okay, so I got a bunch of magical questions to ask you. So House of Suenos is such a spooky tale. I think you weave in elements of the macabre, the paranormal, and in such a beautiful way. And again, the sound designing around it really evokes that.
Megan Roach.
Totally.
Megan Roach.
All accolades to Megan for sure. Would you tell us a moment in your life where you experienced the paranormal?
Ooh. Yes, I will. I experience magic and the paranormal on a regular basis. I'm one of those people that believe, magic is essentially like what is unexplained, right? Like why blood pumps right through our body, why we breathe, like these simple things like that. And I think about a year ago from today, it was a full moon, I think at the end of February. It was like a snow moon, I think. And I invited my friend Cindy Johnson over, and we did a tarot read. And it was a really beautiful experience. We played music, and it was just we did a 3-card pull for each other. And I remember the middle card I pulled was death, which is the present. And I was like, whoa. I mean, death isn't a scary card for people who watch this. It's a card that's actually more about rebirth and life. And I couldn't quite figure out what was happening, because I was kind of at the height. I was at the height of my game. I'm in the show at OSF, the play that I love, people that I love. And then 2 weeks later, the pandemic hit and everything stopped. We just went into this like deep sleep almost. And I think that my future card was like the Tower. And I remember calling my mom because I was so stressed out. I was like, I pulled death and now we're in a pandemic. And I think about that moment a lot, because this past year has been so filled with rebirth of all kinds, right? Rebirth of me as an artist, rebirth. I'm actually starting to go to therapy to like get help for my mental health challenges. I'm connecting with people I haven't talked to in years. Like there's just, I'm moving forward in a way that I had to shed that past self. So I think that the tarot has always been my connection really to the paranormal. And then my last story is when my grandmother passed away. She's a huge part of my life, and she was a huge fan of the theater. Actually, she was on the board of the Intimont for many years back in the 70s. And she would keep all my shows, the clippings, she'd see all my plays. And when she passed away, I was outside. I was just looking at my dog. I'd let my dog out to pee, and I had this visceral experience. I'm sure people have experienced it, where I felt like she just opened the door and she came, walked next to me, and called my dog to come back. And my dog ran back at this moment. I said nothing. And I'm just like out there petting my dog, and I was like, God, that's so strange. And my uncle came and he was like, hey, your grandma just passed away. And I was just like, wow. Like I had this moment where and I realized, and how I grew up is that the dead never leave you ever. They're always with you, forever and ever and ever. All of our ancestors are constantly in our spaces with us, and I just remember that moment being pretty profound. So yeah, most of my experiences with the paranormal are actually quite tender. I don't have a lot of horror experiences with them.
That's totally fine, because there are a lot of beautifully tender paranormal experiences that you just evoke within House of Suenos. That's what makes this tale, so your adaptation, so touching. And then infusing it with Shakespeare's text as well. Just beautifully folded in, like a glorious patchwork blanket. Just beautiful. Name 3 Shakespeare characters that you are obsessed with, other than Hamlet.
Okay, great question. 3 Shakespeare characters that I'm obsessed with other than Hamlet. I am obsessed with the murderers from Richard III. I want to play one of them, the first murderer, so bad. I'm obsessed with the boy from Henry V.
Wait,
I think that's
wait a minute. Oh my God, you're like picking out some rich things. So first of all, let's go back to the murderers of Richard III. For those people who don't know, delve a little bit about that, because that is one of the funniest, most interesting scenes in Shakespeare's plays.
It truly is. It truly is. Well, I love that he does that something. He writes these characters that are so small, like the porter, they're so small, but they're so rich. And you meet them, you're like, oh, I know exactly what your backstory is. I know everything. So in the moment in Richard III I'm talking about, it's when Clarence gets killed. Mari Nelson played the first murderer, I believe, and Portia Shaw played the second murderer when we did it at Seattle Shakespeare Company. And it's like this really intense moment where George is talking, he's talking to his jailer, and he's like, I saw my death. I see the ghost. Like he's like having this beautiful speech, and then he falls asleep, and then these murderers come out and they're like, oh, we're gonna kill you. Like, and one murderer's like, I don't want to do it. And the other murderer's like, you're gonna do it. And they're such a funny dichotomy, the two of them. And just like so brutal at the same time, right? The first murder is like funny, and then he's like, but we got paid, so we have to do it. I don't care that this dude's a dad. It doesn't matter to me. I got paid, I have to do it. So yeah, I think I would love to be the first murderer.
Well described. Okay, now tell us about the boy from Henry V, because what's interesting about that is from the ages of 14 through 21, that was my Shakespeare monologue that I would audition with. Oh. So let people know.
Yeah, I just love that part. It's like another example of, I think, the people affected by war, like you have this huge epic tale of Hal and Henry, then he becomes the king, and all of the devastation of battle. And then in the middle of it, it's like it's like a great cinematic moment. You go from the gigantic to the myopic, right? To this, like, I don't know if myopic's the right word, but to this tiny, tiny little person who is affected by it. And it's like the whole play kind of stills, and I just think that's so beautiful. And I love parts like that. I love parts where it's like you're in an ensemble of a show, maybe you have like 5 different parts, and you're playing these little pieces that just get to kind of shine. And my third and final character that I'm obsessed with that isn't Hamlet. Oh, that's a good question. Third, I'm sure, like, a character that I'm obsessed with, I don't think I'm not obviously right to play it, but is Caliban, I think, from The Tempest. I read a couple of years ago, I was doing a research project on The Tempest, and I started to kind of really delve into what a niche academic thing, which is like Latin American scholars who specialize in Shakespeare. And one of them, I forget his name, he talked about how Caliban represents like what the experience of the colonized, in terms of these white people come and they get you really fucking drunk. They get you really drunk, and then you think they're gods, and you show them the secrets of the isle, right? But you are incredibly poetic and beautiful and have this beautiful life that's then just kind of like leached from you. And then when they leave, you're left to deal with the reckoning of their colonialization. And I think that that play, The Tempest, is so, other than Hamlet, it's the play I've done, it's the play I've done the most. And it's quite sad to me, that play. So yeah, I would say Caliban. I would be interested in, I don't know, I don't think of myself as a director, but working on a production with where the focus of it, the lens, is imperialism, colonialism, and the effects of those things.
For sure. Thank you. Other than Shakespeare, what other artists inspire you?
Well, I recently have just gone into the horror genre. Wiley, Megan, and I, we did a lot of research. So let's see, some movies that I really particularly enjoyed watching was obviously Hereditary. I had a really visceral experience. I was like, I hate this movie, but I still think about it, which means that I love it. And the Haunting of Hill House series, I really love the series, particularly Haunting of Bly Manor. There's actually a lot of similarities between Haunting of Hill House, Haunting of Bly Manor. In terms of like I also really liked WandaVision. I liked WandaVision because I think I enjoy how they take a classic and they don't do what you think they're going to do with a classic. And I'm excited for the future of Marvel, where they start doing that more and more, where they kind of start to crack open.
Subverting the narrative.
Subverting the narrative, which I think is really beautiful. In terms of like books, there's a lot of books. No one's asked me this question because I think a lot of it's in Spanish, but there's a lot of references to literature in my play. There's a lot of references to Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Diana Posada, who's a Central American poet as well. And my favorite actor is probably Raul Julia. I'm really obsessed with Raul Julia to this day. So yeah. And then there's a million local. What a gem! Every day. Oh, I miss him. I miss him so much.
Same. And you know, you mentioned Haunting of Hill House and Bly Manor. I'm also a fan of horror as well, and there is definitely some parallels between those two and Sueños for sure.
Yes, particularly the episode, the bent neck lady, I think, is the one that really influenced Amelia, because she dreamed of her suicide for her whole life, and then it happened.
Yeah.
I really hope I just didn't ruin Haunting of Hill. I'm like, it's been out for like 3 years, so by this point,
they had time. They had time. And it's not an incredible spoiler alert.
No. But yeah, and the Babadook is another one. The Babadook is a great story as well, about depression and it's feeling like a monster that you have to feed. I don't think that's spoiled it.
Totally. All right. 2 more magic questions. Okay. Tell us a dream that you want to fulfill that no one knows about.
A dream that I want to fulfill that nobody knows about.
It doesn't have to be like grand, like I want to be the UN ambassador. You know, it could be something small, like I want to learn how to play the guitar before I die. You know.
Yeah, I think a dream that I want to fulfill. I don't. This might be cheating, but I would like to swim in every ocean.
That's beautiful.
I would like to swim.
That's beautiful. Oh my gosh. You might break the record. I think that's being held by Diana Nyad right now, who swam from, oh dear, Cuba to Florida, I believe. I could be wrong about that, but she's also.
I love how you just knew.
Well, that's because I follow. I try to follow modern day heroes and modern day superheroes, in my opinion. Yeah. Diana Nyad is a woman who is one would consider to be in the, or society would consider to be in the autumn of her years, who swam, you know, from Cuba to Florida, and on a couple of times in order to like beat a record and to do it. And it's just like, and I just think that that's incredible that human beings are capable of such things, you know. And one can be like, big deal, you know, someone swam, you know, like, but the fact that what she was really doing, which I think is something closer to your dream, is that she was testing and challenging her own personal best, you know, and preconceived notions of ageism, you know, and things that we can do, what our bodies can do and what our bodies can't do. And I think that that's beautiful when we can achieve those things. I think it's beautiful that you want to be able to swim in all of the oceans. I don't know if anyone's ever done that before, you know?
I mean, yeah, I just think I'm a very, I mean, water is a huge theme in House of Suenos, and I've been swimming from the ages of like 2 years old. So I immediately like hopped out of my mom's womb and then just dove into the ocean. And I've always been fascinated by water. So I would love that. It'd be really cool.
That's beautiful. All right, here, last one, and this one's pretty extensive.
Yes.
Okay, so if you could give up your entire existence to be a fictional character forever, with no consequences to the people or life that you're leaving behind, nor would you remember or they would remember or miss you, or would you miss that life or those people, who would that character be and why?
Okay, so at first I was like, I'm gonna do something real deep, like something like Anna Karenina, which would be horrible. I don't want to do that. I'm like,
that would be horrible.
Can you imagine? You're like, are you okay? Let's not. Wait.
To give up your entire life and existence to throw yourself on the tracks, basically.
That's not what I'm gonna say. My answer would be, I would love to be Sailor Moon. I would give them everything.
Wait. All of the sailors, you would pick Sailor Moon? Just want to be correct. Okay. And why was the part B of that question?
I love Sailor Moon. I love that she's messy and imperfect and struggles and gets bad grades in school, loves to eat food, doesn't want to do anything. And then at the same time has this incredible group of friends who are like, I love you. I believe in you. Like, we're going to save the world. And that everything she does through a really deep connection, I think, to her like feminine love. And there's, I did one of my women and gender studies and sexuality studies now, my thesis for that major in undergrad was about Sailor Moon, in terms of like the queerness and because there's also, she's queer. I mean, when Sailor Uranus comes into the story, she's like, who are you? I mean, everyone is like that, but I just think that there's a certain sense of poeticism, and what the world needs today more than anything is just like mutual aid and self-love. And just also, she forgives herself too in that series all the time. She's like, it's okay that I'm all these things. It's okay. And I just think it's really beautiful. And I love Sailor Moon.
Yeah, there's a lot of grace in that series, a lot of grace and self-love in that series.
Yeah. And a lot of they deal with some really intense trauma too. I mean, and loss, and the series spans, I mean, it's still going today in kind of a way. But just like she gives up for the health, for the better of the world. And it's really stunning. It's a really beautiful show. So yeah, I would probably say Sailor Moon.
I think that's an excellent choice. Crap. So that's all. Those are all of my questions, and we have 10 minutes left. And I know you have questions you want to ask me, which is not the point of this interview. but I was kind of hoping that you would be verbose enough that we would never get to those questions. But before we run out of time, I would love for you to plug House of Suenos for those who haven't seen it. I'm sorry, who haven't listened to it. It is available right now at seattleshakespeare.org. Just go to that website, seattleshakespeare.org, and then you can listen to it. And you've got 6 days left before it goes away. Anything else you want to say about it?
You know, I don't want to underestimate the importance of mental health in the conversation. I remember when we did a reading of Hamlet feels like just yesterday, but I guess it was like a month ago. And you talked about Hamlet as really like a world trying to reckon with the collateral damage that someone who is experiencing trauma and mental health leaves behind. And I just think that it's really important to understand that House of Suenos is first and foremost a play about learning to live, period, learning to live with your trauma, your grief, your pain, your anxiety, your depression, all of it. And so I think that's my thing is I'm like, if you're struggling, like I'm struggling, like I have struggled and I will struggle, then I think House of Suenos is a play for you. And that just understanding that if you have mental health challenges, the world still wants you. We want you. Everybody wants you. And I think in theater, I'm sure I do want to ask my questions, but I hope that when theater comes back, there's more space for people who have mental health challenges, that we don't ever have to leave our baggage at the door, so that we can manufacture more baggage in the room. But that we all get to exist with a lot more grace and a lot more compassion and understanding. It's something that I have to too, because I think about all the times in my life that I've been like, oh God, this person is so difficult, right? And I'm like, I have no idea what that person's going through, right? Because they've left their effing baggage at the door. And I just hope that when we come back, there's more of an understanding and more of a space for people to be authentically who they are all the time.
Beautifully put. Beautifully put. Yeah, folks, that's it. Like, House of Suenos, get it now. You've got 6 days left. SeattleShakespeare.org. SeattleShakespeare.org. It's right there on the first page. Thank you, Meme. All right, fire away.
Okay, I'm ready. There was an article that came out in American Theater Magazine about Dreamcast. It was like casting. I don't know if you read it. It was really awesome. It was like a bunch of queer, BIPOC, trans. It was really great. So my question for you is like, if you had do you have a dream, and just for the sake of today, classical play, a dream classical play that you would want to either direct or be in, and what is the concept for that play, and who is in the cast?
Oof. Okay. So there are several plays that are my dreams, but I'll go to my favorite Shakespeare play to date, which is A Midsummer Night's Dream. It always is, because it's just incredibly, first of all, it's about love. And there's not enough that can be said about that subject. And it is incredibly flexible and open for direction and interpretation. There's a version I want to direct of it that's set in the 1950s in a high school. Ooh. And so it's Athens High School for the first part of the play. And we're watching these teenagers in the wash of it, of the entire interpretation is kind of like 1950s, almost like B horror movie meets beach blanket bingo with Annette Funicello, meets Nancy Drew, meets Hardy Boys, and then whatever else thrown in there, but like, and it sets up that archetype of the 50s, and with a lot of pop songs from that genre or whatever. And then we get to the forest, and we move out of time and space, out of all of that stuff, into something more just magical, just out of this world. And also queer. That's my interpretation of it. I would love to see, I would love to direct a version of that. and mainly I want to direct a version like that for film, but it would also work for stage as well. And as far as a dream cast is concerned, I don't really have one. There are so many actors that I love to work with and can't wait to employ, you being one of them. And so I just, yeah, you name them, I want them, I want them all. And so like Veruca Salt, like I want the whole world. I want to lock it all up in my pocket. It's my bar of chocolate. So that would be it. Did I answer every aspect of that question?
I love it. No, I love it. And then my last question for you, which I didn't really warn you about, but it's just, what do you think the future of Shakespeare is in American theater?
Shakespeare will always have a place in American theater. Its universality will always call to somebody, no matter what. It will always have a place. I think it would be, I would say I'm more interested in what happens to society if for just a generation, it somehow vanishes. The producing of it in its original form vanishes, so that when another generation, the following generation, comes back to it and sort of rediscovers it, that we see something we maybe have never ever seen before. One, because of the beautiful mixture of this newer generation coming to this incredibly old, ancient body of work and form of storytelling with new tools and new imagination already downloaded in their systems to be able to look at this text and to be like, well, we don't even have a frame of reference for that. It would be really, I'm more interested in what that would look like. But to be perfectly honest, in a very almost scientific way, I think that would be impossible, because Shakespeare's storylines, even if not his actual stories, are in every single story, in every single media you can see right now. Netflix to YouTube clips to TikTok videos. I mean, like, his stories are everywhere. Not that he invented, we know that he stole the genesis of lots of his story ideas, Romeo and Juliet to Julius Caesar to Hamlet, like they're all variations on an original tale, but those stories just continue to get siphoned, through our zeitgeist as human beings, regardless of where we are on the planet.
I think that's beautiful. I love that. I think, yeah, I would agree with you. I would say that I think the future of Shakespeare in American theater is 100% things like Romeo y Julieta, like House of Sueños, like Hercules that the public is doing. I know Hercules is Shakespeare, but I just, things OSF is doing a thing called the Cymbeline Project, which is essentially like exploring Cymbeline over 2 years via like web series, which I think is fascinating. So using it as a base to tell a different, better story, I think is really beautiful.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Meme.
Thank you for having. This was so lovely. I'm like, oh, thank you so much. Chef's kiss.
Mwah. Just a joy. Just like eating dark chocolate. This was great. Again, folks, 6 days left to listen to House of Suenos, already available. All episodes are already available to listen to download at seattleshakespeare.org. That's seattleshakespeare.org. Get to it now before it goes away. Bye-bye, Meme. Thank you.
Bye.